Today is one of those special episodes where I have a guest, and today's guest knows a lot about trust. Scott, call sign Intake, flew for the U.S. Navy Aerial Demonstration Team, also known as my favorite team, the Blue Angels. Scott flew when another plane's wingtip was 12 inches away from his canopy. Talk about the trust that you have to have in the person flying next to you. But he didn't stop there, because Scott flew F-35s and has since then, and until today, flies an L-39 in another demonstration team, the Patriots. Scott will share how he learned to trust his partners, his colleagues, his plane, the people who maintain the plane. Because as I said, in this business, you trust or you die. Right after this.
Welcome to The Trust Show. I'm Yoram Solomon, your host, the author of the Book of Trust, and facilitator of the Trust Habits Workshop. My mission is simple. I want to help you form habits that build your trustworthiness, because the answer to this question will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you?
Okay, we have a great pleasure of having Scott Intake in our show today. We'll talk about trust in when flying a Blue Angels F-18, flying a Patriot L-39, and in general. So I'll dive right into it. Scott, I see that you indicated your name is Intake. I know that pilots get nicknames, and typically it's associated with a story. So how did you get the name Intake?
Yoram, I appreciate the question. Thanks for having me on the show today. Intake as my call sign. Normally, Navy pilots do something dumb in an airplane or something dumb in port. And so mine is actually neither of those. If I turn to the profile, I have a big nose and I take in more than my fair share of air. So intake is the part of the jet engine that sucks in all the air. That's how I got intake.
Yeah, and frankly, when I saw that you go by the call sign Intake, I immediately started thinking about you leaving something in the intake of the F-18, which can go really, really bad once you start the engine. But I'm glad that's not what happened.
Absolutely.
So you joined the, you know what, even before you joined the Blue Angels, you served in the Navy.
So, absolutely. Yeah, I had joined the Navy. Interestingly, I saw Top Gun when I was a senior in high school, and my best friend Bob and I told all of our friends that we were going to be fighter pilots. And after we both went to college, I went to Pepperdine, was an accounting major, worked for KPMG Marwick. And we both decided that we would join the service and try to pursue that dream of becoming a fighter pilot.
Okay, so we're not going as far back as an officer and a gentleman.
Well, I went through aviation officer candidate school, much like Richard Gere, an officer and a gentleman. That's how I got my commission and joined the Navy in 1992. Actually, the fall of 1991. Started flight school and did my first operational tour in the F-18 over in Japan. Forward deployed at NAF at Tsugi, Naval Air Facility at Tsugi on the Independence, and then was a flight instructor in the F-18 with the Marine Corps down at Marine Corps Station El Toro, and then subsequently Miramar. And from there, I was selected to the Blue Angels in 1999. Just kind of a quick recap, but the Blue Angels was just part of my 22-year Navy career. It was 3 years of that period.
Right, and people don't necessarily know that you don't spend your entire service in Blue Angels. You only get, 2 or 3 years, 2 flying and 1 training?
Well, no, every pilot selected gets 2 years flying in the demonstration as a Blue Angel demonstration pilot. 1 pilot each year that is selected is the narrator for the team. And I was the junior person the year that I was selected with Hunter Hobson. He was our Marine, and Kevin Calling, the other Navy pilot that was selected. And I was the junior guy, so I got to be number 7, kind of the advanced member of advancement member of the team. I went to the air shows before everybody else to set it up, and then got to do all the VIP rides and then narrate the show. So it was a heck of a year. We had a great time.
Yeah, by the way, I have to share something with you. I told you before the show that the F-18, I loved the F-18 ever since it came out, ever since it was an F-17 and it lost to the F-16 on a U.S. Air Force bid, and McDonnell Douglas turned it around and made it an F-18. Which I think is the best looking plane ever. And I actually I visited the facility where they make them in St. Louis.
Oh, it's a great assembly line. I have been there. I am a huge fan of the F-18.
Yeah.
I've got 4,000 hours in the F-18. I have spent a lot of time flying that airplane, and I think it's incredibly capable.
It's funny that, how people have their bucket list. My bucket list only had, for a very long time, one item. And I'm saying a very long time, that's including now. It's not a place in the world where I want to see. I want to sit in the back seat of an F-18, landing on a carrier and taking off from a carrier. That's it. That's the only thing. Don't know how I'll ever do that, but that's the one thing on my bucket item.
Oh, that's great. It's a good goal to have. Maybe you need to call the Navy recruiter, Yoram, and see if they can get you into flight training.
Yes, definitely, because they typically recruit 58-year-olds.
Yeah.
They're going to put me on a very old plane. So you started with the Blue Angels in 1999. We actually moved from Israel to U.S. and essentially in California in 98, late 98. And in 99 was the first time in Fleet Week that we saw the Blue Angels. That was amazing. I've never seen anything like that. But in 2000, we saw them every year. I mean, I see them here in Texas every time they come. But in 2000, I'm going to guess that I saw you fly.
You very well could have seen me fly if you were watching the show during Fleet Week.
Yes.
Then you would have seen me. At a minimum, you would have heard me as the narrator in 2000. I don't know how long you were in San Francisco, but it's such an iconic show site. Yes. And the Blue Angels are there to certainly represent our maritime services. And who gets to fly like that over San Francisco? I still pinch myself having had the opportunity and still getting to do it with the Patriot jet team. But absolutely. And just as a sidebar, I am headed to Tel Aviv the first week of November to go spend a little bit of time in Israel for my second time back. I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, that's cool. I've just been there, and my wife just been there. We actually go at different times. But, when you flew in, so we saw them every year in San Francisco until 2003. 2003, we already moved to Texas, but we came back to do a few things in California during Fleet Week. So we saw the Blue Angels one more time there and every time here. But you made my daughter cry. I mean, you may not know that, but when you go over the audience at low speed with full throttle, I get excited. My daughter started crying. My older daughter started crying. Younger was not born yet, and so by the way, she says hi.
Oh, fantastic! Please tell her I apologize that we made her cry, and it wasn't on purpose. It was just the noise of the airplanes, I am sure.
So let me go to the topic of this podcast, and the topic is trust. And the first question I have to ask you is, there are pilots. I fly planes. I flew in San Francisco over the Golden Gate Bridge with a Piper Cherokee, not with an F-18. So, it doesn't matter how much you push the throttle. You don't do 500 knots. You don't break the sound barrier. But flying in the Blue Angels and now in the Patriots, and for my audience, Patriots is a demonstration team that flies L-39s, and I'll ask you about the L-39. But I have to ask you, do you have, because when you fly a Blue Angel, how far is the wingtip from? If you're number 5, but still, when you fly the Delta formation. How close is the wingtip of the next plane next to you to your windshield, to your canopy?
The short answer is at the end of the season, which is in November of each year, it can be within a foot, within 12 inches from wingtip to canopy.
Yes.
And so it's really, really a tight formation, which is the foundation of trust. And so the interesting thing about the team, I had mentioned getting selected with Kevin and Hunter. We hire 3 new pilots every single year to the 6-ship Delta formation. And so for 77 years, the Blue Angels have had this incredible culture of excellence that is founded in trust and respect. And that we do that through the debrief. And the only way to debrief effectively and have the opportunity to build that foundation of trust and respect is being able to acknowledge your own mistakes and errors and or deviations from the standard. We call it safeties. So after a flight demonstration in the debrief, I would say something like, I'll take a safety in a high performance climb because I rotated too slow and or pulled down in the split S too low, and I was 50 feet too low, and I was 20 knots too fast. And by self-identifying, I am acknowledging to the others that I make mistakes, but that I am absolutely willing to learn from them. I am willing to have no ego whatsoever and take the feedback from everybody else on the team. And that's how year in and year out for 77 years, the Blue Angels have been the world's greatest flight demonstration team by foundationally building that trust and respect through the debrief process. And that's all embedded in the culture. That's how we get 12 inches wingtip to canopy separation at the end of the year, because we have gotten as good as we can get flying. And then right at the end, we shake hands and say, what an incredible season. We had a great time. Bring us 3 new pilots, and we will make them the best in the world as well through trust and confidence.
So let me ask you, trust really compensates for fear. When you're afraid of something, then the way to compensate, the way to go over your fear barrier is by trusting other people, trusting the machine, trusting yourself. But let's start with the fear. Do you have a death wish to go on a team like that? And even now with the Patriots, you're still flying a pretty heavy plane, heavier than air, which is why what the V was for in the squadron numbers originally in the Navy. But it's much heavier than air. It's flying pretty fast. It doesn't want to stay up there in the air if you don't control it right. Do you have a death wish?
No, I definitely don't have a death wish. Interestingly, though, in September of 1999, when I joined the team, we had a very severe fatal accident where 2 Blue Angel pilots were killed October 28th, 1999. And I was the only safety officer, F-18 safety officer on the team. And I was asked to investigate that accident, which is a crushing work responsibility, because you're in the field with airplane, and you know the people that lost their lives, and so from a fear perspective, I carried that burden of loss and potential to have an incident and or accident, and I was able to compartmentalize and trust my teammates because we absolutely had to and wanted to. But my last flight, when I landed in the F-18 Blue Angel number 5 in November of 2002, as soon as I touched down, I just started sobbing and I was crying. And it wasn't from the fear that I might have an incident or accident. It was from the relief that I had survived this very high intensity, high risk evolution for 3 years, having lost 2 teammates in October of 99 and now November of 2002, through the trust, respect, debriefing, I had made it. And not to be confused or have your listeners think that it is high risk, but we mitigate that risk by building the trust and having standards and debriefing every flight to dial up our execution. So the fear Not really. Definitely not a death wish. I happen to be an adrenaline junkie, Yoram, where I love to go fast. I mean, if you talk about feeling the need for speed, I definitely feel the need for speed. But as a 55-year-old man, I'm having to dial back on that a little bit and recognize any limitations that I might have. But I still fly for the Patriot jet team. That's still founded on trust and respect. And you have to hold the standard for yourself and your teammates to execute what was briefed or communicate if there is an airborne change. And so, now at 55 and flying for the Patriot jet team, what my wife calls the Masters division, I have a healthy respect for what we do, but I love doing it because the intensity of it and the team and the bonding of the team is so significant, all the way down to the trust that we place in our maintenance personnel that maintain the aircraft, because the machine has to be running as well as the human being that is operating it. And that was true in the Blue Angels. It's true with the Patriot jet team. And I'm really just honored to have the opportunity to have flown for the Blue Angels and certainly to continue to fly for the Patriots. I apologize. That was a long answer, but it's a very detailed and meaty subject that is worth digging into. So,
but here's an interesting question. The machine itself, the F-18, you flew the F-18 for quite a few years, quite a few hours with that machine. At some point, you really start to feel the machine. You really start to feel comfortable. You can trust the machine. But you get into the Blue Angels, and relatively very quickly, you get to fly with people that you don't have a very long relationship with to be able to build that trust. How do you accelerate building a trust and to fly an F-18 12 inches, or even at the beginning? At the beginning, you're what, 3 feet away, 4 feet away? It's still pretty close. How do you build that trust that quickly with people you don't know?
So it's interesting because I'm not sure that it's built that quickly. If you take it back to flight training and working through primary to intermediate to advanced when you're in jets, you are foundationally building this respect for the capabilities of the people that you are flying with. So if you can land an $80 million airplane on the back of a $1 billion ship at sea at night, there is a level of competence and skill set and physiological capability that exists. Now you get selected to the Blue Angels, and it is only amplified because you're taking the same skill sets that you use in an operational squadron and tightening it down, like you said, 3-4 feet apart, and ultimately, not in all the maneuvers, but some of the maneuvers down to within 12 inches of each other. And so foundationally, for years, we have built that trust. And that's through the same debriefing process and letting go of your ego and being willing to learn. You have to be willing to identify where you have a weakness or an opportunity to improve, let go of your ego and recognize that you have the capability to do it, and then move forward each and every day to get better. Yeah. And you not only have to hold yourself to the standard, but you have to hold your other teammates to the standard. And sometimes that can be a challenge by having the courage to debrief a peer or somebody senior and let them know where their I hate to use weaknesses, but their opportunities to improve and accelerate their performance. So that's a really great question. But foundationally, naval aviation, it's embedded. We just dial it up a little bit with the Blue Angels, certainly.
Yeah. Actually, I would disagree with you that there are weaknesses. I have weaknesses. You have weaknesses. Everybody has weaknesses. I think we're being a little too sensitive these days. We don't want to use the word weaknesses. We're going to call it areas for improvement where, in fact, we may have weaknesses. But I heard two things in what you said. One was that, yes, you didn't know those people that all of a sudden you're going to be flying 4 feet to 12 inches away from. You didn't know them, but that trust was transferable from the fact that you knew. I mean, nobody comes out of the Naval Academy into a blue F-18 with yellow numbers on them and starts flying the Blue Angels. So you knew that the Navy took those pilots through very rigorous process and training, and they got to a level of proficiency that you're making the assumption, if I'm going to be flying next to somebody like this, I know that I can trust them even if I don't know them yet. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, and occasionally somebody that will be selected to the team because they have the social skills to travel with the team 300 out of 365 days, which is really important because we socialize a tremendous amount together. Some people just don't have the physiological capabilities to fly with the Blue Angels. It's rare, but it happens. What's interesting, having gone through the interview process, the first year I was not selected to the team, but I specifically remember a question that I answered in the interview where I wasn't fully truthful in my weaknesses, to your point, in my shortcomings as a pilot. And the following year, I was asked the same question, and I answered it truthfully and honestly and shared my shortcomings as a pilot, but I also shared what I was doing personally with my physical skills and my mental skills to improve on those weaknesses. And because of that vulnerability and that relaxation of the ego, I was selected that year. And so what the team looks for is people that are have the reputation as good pilots, but also have the willingness to be better day in, day out, and hold themselves accountable to the standards of the Blue Angels.
And it's interesting you bring this up because trust is not all competence. I mean, you may be a very competent pilot, but trust is made of other things, other softer skills. It's not enough to know how to fly an F-18 if you are not social enough. And by the way, I'm a strong believer in when you are part of a team, whether it's Blue Angels or any other high performance, high risk, high whatever team, your ability to socialize, to become friends with those people, dramatically impact the level of trust that they have in you and that you have in them.
Absolutely. And I had mentioned the word courage, but there is an element of courage, transparency, selfless service, vulnerability, letting go of your ego, and to build that trust. And all of those things play in. It is not easy for people to tell somebody else that they have a weakness. But what I would tell your listeners, when somebody tells you that you have a weakness or a shortcoming, they're not telling you that you are incompetent. If you were incompetent, they wouldn't share that information with you. They're actually telling you that they believe in you. They believe in you so much that they're willing to share their experience, and they believe that you have the capability to achieve more in whatever that is in any organization. So when you get debriefed and somebody is giving you, let's call it constructive criticism to improve, they're actually saying to you, I believe in you so much that please take my suggestions. And if you implement these suggestions, then you can improve your performance and the execution, not only individually, but for the organization. And I think that's important.
In my research, what I found was that there's actually, first of all, it's a reciprocal relationship. If I trust you, I am, and these are the numbers that I found. If I trust you, I am 240% more willing to be vulnerable with you, to admit to my mistakes, to my shortcomings, to my weaknesses, 240% more. And guess what? If I'm willing to do that, you trust me more because, when somebody tells you that they're perfect, they will not admit to their mistakes, you're worried. I mean, I'm guessing sitting in the front seat of an F-18, well, if it's a seat, there's the only seat of an F-18, 12 inches away from you is someone who says he's perfect, and you're wondering, at what point am I going to find some imperfections that he is not willing to admit to?
Yeah. That's an interesting point. And you said it right when you said that we all have weaknesses. We all know that we have room for improvement, but the willingness to improve is absolutely critical. And you have to have that shared respect for each other to do it and to move forward as an organization, as a team, as a company. I like to talk about the use of pronouns. And so when you're planning and putting your team together and trying to get them riled up, I love the pronouns we, us, and our, right? We're going to do a great job. Let's go out there and we can do great things. It's our responsibility and we can win together, those kind of terms. But in the debrief, if I stood in front of you as the leader and said, we could have done better, we could have communicated better, we could have planned better, we could have executed better, it was our responsibility, I'm pushing blame on you, and that's what you hear. But if I stand in front of you and say the exact same thing with individual pronouns, I didn't communicate enough, I wasn't very good at communicating the plan and the expectations of the execution, and it was my responsibility. What did I just do with you by using those pronouns, Yoram?
Yeah.
I took responsibility for it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I took responsibility for it, and now you're going, gosh, this person shared their weaknesses and shortcomings, and now I will be willing and more vulnerable to share mine.
And again, it's a reciprocal relationship. Your ability to do that, give credit to all, take accountability to mistakes yourself. That's what builds the trust of the others in you. Because you know what? Guess what? Your wingtip is 18. Well, actually, not if you're flying number 5 or 6. Your wingtip is 18 inches from another wingtip, another canopy.
What's interesting is the canopy is right here, and the wingtip of the other aircraft is 12 inches. In November, when we're the best that we can be, no kidding, we are remarkably close to each other on many of the, we call them sets, many of the sets for the maneuvers.
And again, that's where the element of time comes in. We spend more time, we practice more, but you also get to trust the other person. My guess, I mean, I've seen what it looks like in videos. I haven't flown in a Blue Angel or Patriot or any other demonstration team, but I've seen it. It's not, they're not static like they look from the ground. They move all the time. And when you get to look at the person next to you and you go, I can predict what they're doing. I trust that whatever they do, that wingtip stays not less than 12 inches away from this plexiglass here. Then it allows you to get closer to them.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely it does. And, when you talked about number 5 being on the outpost and number 6, think about the trust that 2 and 3 have to have, because they're wedged in between number 1, number 5, or number 1 and number 6. They have nowhere to go. So they are not only expecting, but trusting us to do our jobs and hold our positions the way that to meet the Blue Angel standard, because they're pinched between 2 airplanes, which is exceptional trust.
But not to mention, when you're flying number 5 and number 6, you're flying against each other. Number 5 and number 6. You are just hoping, wait, are we going right or left? That's you don't ask that question at that point.
It's really interesting. Randy Howell flies the number 6 jet for the Patriot jet team, and I fly the number 5 jet. So we do opposing maneuvers also. And Randy and I have so much trust in each other, especially having flown together in Maverick and with the Patriot jet team, that sometimes he will bring what we call the crowd. That's the separation of the 2 airplanes that are opposing each other. I will think, gosh, he said that he sees me, but it looks like he's aiming right for me. And we better roll pretty quick as we hit center point, because if we don't, we could actually hit wings, because we're 5 or 10 feet away from each other. But that's at a closure rate of 500 miles an hour or 600 miles an hour. So that trust needs to be there. So
You led me to two questions. One of them is you already threw that bomb up there, the M word. So two of your planes, I believe, did fly in shooting the movie Top Gun Maverick, and you said that you flew one of them. So tell us a little about that.
Yeah, so it's a great segue into people expect the Blue Angels to have trust and respect. When I was asked to train the actors and actresses for Top Gun Maverick, we did that in December of 2018. And then, and that was an incredible experience. We were demonstrating how to not only fly a fighter as a fighter, what that would be like, but allowing the actors and actresses to think about how they would act while also being in a fighter aircraft. And then in July of 2019, I was asked to be a stunt pilot in the movie for the final fight scene. And Randy Howell and I, who I was just discussing, flew that final fight scene. So when Maverick and Rooster steal the F-14 and they're fighting the Su-57s through the canyons and on the way back to the aircraft carrier, Randy and I got to fly all those scenes during a 2-week period. What's interesting about that, Yoram, is the trust and confidence not only of Randy and I, because we had established that, but Kevin LaRosa, who was the aerial pilot in the helicopters and the Phenom, and leading the aerial cinematography team as the aerial stunt coordinator. We had to rapidly develop trust because some of the scenes that we were setting up required pointing directly at a helicopter and at the very last second diving under it, and or through the canyons, the helicopter would be less than 100 feet, and we would take the fighters right underneath the helicopter. And that takes a tremendous amount of trust and respect. And we had to form that in a very rapid fashion.
Do you think the helicopter pilot was closing his eyes when you were going under?
I did a podcast once, and I was sharing the story of how intense it was to fly under the helicopter. And Kevin LaRosa said, "You should have seen it from where I was." And so we had a really great conversation about that, because I'm pointing a fighter directly at him. And at the very last moment, I would either pitch under it or go under it if he was level. So that pitch under it, the helicopter would be up, and I would point up, and he would want to film down the intakes of the engine because it's a good shot. And then at the last minute, you duck under the helicopter, which you have to precisely time the rate and closure of these two vehicles, helicopter and jet, coming towards each other. That takes a lot of trust on both parts.
So we talked a lot about trusting other people, trusting other pilots. Let's talk about trusting the machine. Sure. You start with an F-18. Did you fly Super Hornets as well?
I was all Legacy Hornets, so A, B, C, and D variants, vice the E and the F variant. Yeah. Okay.
So you flew the Legacy Hornet. Then you fly an L-39. An L-39 is a Czech trainer used by the Soviet Union back in the time to train their pilots. And then, well, actually not then, but at some point in the Navy, you were flying F-35s.
Right. So the interesting thing about trusting the machine is the men and women that work on those machines, because none of this happens without people. So that trust element is absolutely critical. I don't trust the machine. I trust the people that work on the machine. And so in aviation, we always pre-flight the airplane to ensure that it is prepared correctly. What is fascinating about the Blue Angels is we don't pre-flight the airplane. We trust that the mechanics and the maintenance personnel have prepared it, pre-flighted it, and that aircraft is ready to go. And that is a very unique element to the Blue Angels, because in every other Navy unit, we pre-flight the airplane, get a chance to look at it, kind of quality control the work. But there's things that are done inside the airplane that you have to trust that it's done correctly, and with the trust and knowledge that the people doing the work are doing their very best work in accordance with the standards and the manuals, in doing it correctly. So there's a lot of trust.
And I'm guessing that the trust you have in the mechanics, the ground crew, uh, that trust probably starts with a transferable trust. You trust because not everybody gets to be a mechanic on the Blue Angels either. It's not like, oh, I just finished mechanic school, I'm going to the Blue Angels. You have to trust that they went through a certain rigorous process that will make them trustworthy. But over time, it starts balancing towards now you know them personally, and you know that you can trust them. It shifts from the what you know about them without knowing them personally towards knowing them personally and trusting them because of the personal knowledge and acquaintance with them. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's true. And I talk a lot when I talk about leadership about valuing and respecting the employees and the selfless service that is required. When I was in the Navy, I would talk about the selfless service up and down the chain. It was my responsibility as a commanding officer to serve all of the people in the unit. And I considered that my responsibility. But the secondary effect of that is that people felt valued and respected and had ownership within the organization because of that relationship, the building that you were talking about. It's absolutely critical. And in that same regard, there's with that ownership, there's companies that have good strategic visions and communicate that vision, have ownership buy-in by the people in the business organization team. And once you have developed that purpose-driven ownership, then people are committed to achieving the strategic goals of the organization. And so they will ultimately ratchet up the execution of their jobs.
And so that actually leads us to one of the last questions I have. But before I get there, you're involved with the Blue Angels Foundation.
Yes, sir.
Okay, tell us a little about that. I mean, I know that just recently a Charity Navigator gave it 100 out of 100, which means that you can really trust that organization to use their donations for good. Tell us a bit about that foundation. What does it do?
So the Blue Angels Foundation is committed to giving back. And I was asked to be on the board of directors back in 2021. And so our primary mission right now is to prevent veteran suicide. And much like saying weakness, some people don't like to use that term. People get a little uncomfortable when you talk about suicide, but there are 17 veterans and 5 active duty members on average that are taking their lives each day. And the people might say, well, they need to go to the VA, the Veterans Administration, but that's a government entity, and people are concerned about admitting that they might need some help mentally and or physically because they don't want it on their record. And so the Blue Angels Foundation provides funding to Emory in Atlanta, who can provide anonymous and continuous counseling services along with UCLA. We're currently trying to work a program with Johns Hopkins where we use the juggernaut brand of the Blue Angels to drive funding that we can then distribute to behavioral specialists that can get the veterans the help that they need and raising awareness to it. So that prevention of veteran suicide is critical and it needs attention. So I appreciate you letting me talk about it because people need to be aware of it, not afraid of it, but acknowledge that it exists and that there is something that we can do about it. And then another project that we're deeply involved in is transitional housing. So as our armed forces members get injured and need a prosthetic or a service animal, normally they would leave the hospital and then go right to their home. But they haven't learned the skills to work with their prosthetic, maneuver around the house, operate a wheelchair, integrate with their families, work with their service dog, whatever their specific need is. And so we have worked with Freedom Station in San Diego to help fund transitional housing where there can be multiple veterans living together, going through the same challenges that are inherent with those physical and or mental disabilities that they have, and they can work together to learn to live again before they go home. to their own residents. And so both things that I'm very, very proud of, and proud of our accomplishments.
And I'm grateful, and I'm sure that a lot of other people are grateful for the efforts, the Blue Angels Foundation and you specifically. I'll go to the last question. When I saw the first time I heard about you, when I saw a post that you had with a writer's retreat back, I think in August of last year, when you were doing an outline for a book, and guess what? Right behind your right shoulder, I think it's your right shoulder. Yeah, if I can read Top Gun, then it's your right shoulder, is the book Full Throttle. Tell us about the book. Tell us what you do other than fly jets like your tail's on fire.
Yeah, so with Maverick, a lot of people started saying, Scott, how did you get to fly in Maverick? So you saw the movie in 1986 with everybody else, and then 33 years later, you're flying as a stunt pilot. And there were a lot of incredible things that took place on the journey between those two items. And my dad, who was a submarine officer in the Navy, always said, Scott, your stories are absolutely outrageous. These stories of aviation, you should write them down. And so he's still with us. He turns 86 this year. And so people were asking about Maverick, and I thought, okay, now is the time to write this book about how I have been able to do the things that I have been able to do, whether it's the 5 combat tours, flying with the Blue Angels, flying with the Patriot jet team, Maverick, F-35 command. And it's the ups and downs, because it hasn't all been roses. There have been many challenges. And I just talk about that and how to persevere and overcome and continue to at least try to achieve great things by saying yes to opportunities, willing to let go of your ego and improve by recognizing your weaknesses, embracing failure, and then asking for help when you need it. And I think those 3 elements are really critical. And so that's kind of the theme that weaves through the book with the ups and downs. So the book is Full Throttle, from the Blue Angels to Hollywood Stunt Pilot. It's available where books are sold. You can click on Amazon or scottkartvedt.com, and it'll take you to a link where you can buy the book. And 20% of the proceeds go towards the Blue Angels Foundation as we continue to prevent veteran suicide.
That's great. Well, Scott Intake, I appreciate your time. I appreciate everything that you gave our audience today. It's important. One question that just came to mind: when you fly, whether you flew at the Blue Angels, okay, granted, we were both younger back then when you flew for the Blue Angels, but when you fly today at 55, still pretty close to another plane, are you afraid?
No. If we haven't flown in a long time, I will be anxious. But we generally will do an academic session. We do what's called walkthroughs, which is visualization of what we're going to execute and how we're going to execute it. So by the time we actually get in the jets, we have already flown the show or the practice for that day 2 or 3 times. So by the time we get in the airplanes, we've visualized it, we've seen it, and now we're actually executing it real life. But it's the 4th or 5th time that we have flown it that day. So
in your head. So
yeah, absolutely. Anxious, but not afraid.
Yes. Okay. Scott Intake, again, thank you for your service. First of all, thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for what you do to the Blue Angels Foundation. I could have talked to Scott for another 2-3 hours, but as you heard, Scott does not have a death wish. Scott took risks that very, very few people will take, but he did that because he trusted the people next to him and the people on the ground. I hope this was helpful. Until next week, may trust be with you. This is The Trust Show. If you enjoyed this episode, like it, subscribe to this channel, and get informed when I release more episodes like that. And remember, the answer to this question will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can you be trusted?